Good morning, everyone. We are the Group 3 and we are assigned to discuss the topic in Lesson 9 entitled The Global City. So why we need to study the global cities? It is because the globalization is spatial. So this statement means two things. First, globalization is spatial because it occurs in physical places. So you can see it when foreign investments and capital move through a city and when companies build skyscrapers. People who are working in these businesses are Filipino working abroad to start to purchase or rent high-rise condominium units and better homes. As all this event happened, more poor people are driven out of city center to make way for the new developments. Second, it is spatial because what makes it move is the fact that it is based in places. Like in Los Angeles, the home of Hollywood is where movies are made for global consumption. Also, the main headquarters of Sony is located in Tokyo, where the company coordinates the sale of its various electronics goods to branches across the world. In other words, cities act on globalization and globalization acts on cities. They are the sites as well as the mediums of the globalization. In years to come, more and more people will experience globalization through cities. In 1950, only 30% of the world lived in urban areas. By 2014, the number increased to 54%, and by 2050, it is expected to reach 60%. So this lesson studies globalization through the living environment of a rapidly increasing number of people. Sociologist Saskia Sassen popularized the term global cities in 1990s. Her criteria for what constitutes a global city were primary economic. In her work, she initially identified three global cities, which is the New York, London, and Tokyo, as hubs of the global finance and capitalism. They are the homes, for instance, of the world's top stock exchange wherein investors buy and sell shares in major corporations. So the New York has the New York Stock Exchange or the NYSE, and the London has the Financial Times Stock Exchange or the FTSE, and the Tokyo has the Nikkei. Recent commentators expanded the criteria that Sassen used to determine what constitutes a global city due to the latest developments. For example, the Los Angeles, San Francisco, Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou. So the Los Angeles is not wealthy as Big Apple or the New York's nickname, but can now rival in movie making. Also, the San Francisco is the home of the most powerful internet companies, which is the Facebook, Twitter, and Google. Also, the growth of Chinese economy has turned cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou into center of trades and finance. The Chinese government reopened the Shanghai Stock Exchange in late 1990. And since then, it has grown to become the fifth largest stock market in the world. Others considered some cities global simply because they are great place to live in. One of these is in Australia, Sydney. It commands the greatest proportion of capital in Australia. However, Melbourne, Australia is described as Sydney's rival global city because many magazines and lists have now referred to it as the world's most livable city, a place with good public transportation, a thriving cultural scene, and a relatively easy pace of life.
So what are the multiple attributes of the global city? The foremost characteristic is economic power. Economic power largely determines which cities are global. As indicated in the PowerPoint, New York may have the largest stock market in the world, but Tokyo houses the most number of corporate headquarters. Shanghai may have a smaller stock market compared to New York and Tokyo, but plays a critical role in the global economic supply chain ever since China has become the manufacturing center of the world. Shanghai has the world's busiest container port, moving over 33 million container units in 2013. Economic opportunities in a global city make it attractive to talents from across the world. Since the 1970s, many of the top IT programmers and engineers from Asia have moved to the San Francisco Bay Area to become some of the key figures in Silicon Valley's technology boom. London remains a preferred destination for many Filipinos with nursing degrees. Global cities are also centers of authority, which Washington, D.C. may not be as wealthy as New York, but it is the seat of American state power. People around the world know its major landmarks: the White House, the Capitol Building, Supreme Court, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Washington Monument. Similarly, compared with Sydney and Melbourne, Canberra is a sleepy town and thus this is not as attractive to a tourist. But as Australia's political capital, it is home to the country's top politicians, bureaucrats, and policy advisors. The cities that house major international organizations may also be considered centers of political influence. The headquarters of the United Nations is in New York, and that of the European Union is in Brussels. An influential political city near the Philippines is Jakarta, which is not just the capital of Indonesia but also the location of the main headquarters of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Powerful political hubs exert influence on their own countries as well as on international affairs. The European Central Bank, which oversees the euro, the European Union's currency, is based in Frankfurt. A decision made in that city can, therefore, affect the political economy of an entire continent and beyond. Global cities are centers of higher learning and culture. A city's intellectual influence is seen through the influence of its publishing industry. Many of the books that people read are published in places like New York, London, or Paris. The New York Times carries the name of the New York City, but it is far from being a local newspaper. People read it not just across America, but all over the world. One of the reasons for the many tourists visiting Boston is because they want to see Harvard University, the world's top university. Many Asian teenagers are moving to the cities in Australia because of the leading English language university there. Education is currently Australia's third largest export, just behind coal and iron ore, and significantly ahead of tourism. In 2015, the Australian government reported that it made as much as 19.2 billion Australian dollars from education alone. We have already explained why Los Angeles, center of the American film industry, may be considered a global city. A less obvious example, however, is Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. It is so small that one can tour the entire city by bicycle in 30 minutes. It is not the home of a major stock market and its population is rather homogeneous. However, Copenhagen is now considered one of the culinary capitals of the world, with its top restaurants incommensurate with its size. As the birthplace of new Nordic cuisine, Copenhagen has set into motion various culinary trends like foraging the forest for local ingredients. Similarly, Manchester, England in the 1980s was a dreary, industrial city. But many prominent post-punk and new wave bands like Joy Division, The Smiths, The Happy Mondays hailed from this city, making it a global household name. In Southeast Asia, Singapore is slowly becoming a cultural hub for the region. It now houses some of the region's top television stations and new organizations. Its various art galleries and cinemas also show paintings from artists and filmmakers, respectively, from the Philippines and Thailand. It is in fact sometimes easier to watch the movie of a Filipino indie filmmaker in Singapore than it is in Manila. It is the cultural power of global cities that ties them to the imagination. Think how many songs have been written about New York and how these references conjure up images of a place where anything is possible. Today, global cities become culturally diverse. In a global city, one can try cuisines from different parts of the world. Because of their large Turkish populations, for example, Berlin and Tokyo offer some of the best Turkish food one can find outside of Turkey. Manila is not very global because of the dearth of the foreign residents, but Singapore is because it has a foreign population of 38%.
The challenges of global cities. Global cities conjure up images of fast-paced, exciting cosmopolitan lifestyles. But such descriptions are lacking. Global cities also have their undersides. They can be sites of great inequality and poverty as well as tremendous violence. Like the broader processes of globalization, global cities create winners and losers. In this section, we list some pathologies of the global cities based on the research of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Cities can be sustainable because of their density. According to Richard Florida notes, ecologists have found that by concentrating their population in smaller areas, cities and metros decrease human encroachment on natural habits. Denser settlement pattern yield energy saving. Apartment buildings, for example, are more efficient to heat and cool than detached suburban houses. More importantly, because of the sheer size of the city populations across the world, it is not surprising that urban areas consume most of the world's energy. Cities only cover 2% of the world's land mass, but they consume 78% of global energy. Therefore, if carbon emissions must be cut to prevent global warming, this massive energy consumption in cities must be curbed. This action will require a lot of creativity. For example, many food products travel many miles before they get to major city centers. Shipping this food through train, buses, and even planes increases carbon emissions. Will it be possible to grow more foods in cities instead? Solutions like so-called vertical farming built in abandoned buildings may lead to the way towards more environmentally sustainable cities. If more food can be grown with less water in denser spaces, city will begin to be greener.
The global city and the poor. We have consistently noted that economic globalization has paved the way for massive inequality. This phenomenon is thus very pronounced in cities. Some large cities, particularly those in Scandinavia, have found ways to mitigate inequality through the state-led social distribution programs. Yet many cities, particularly those in the developing countries, are sites of contradiction. In places like Mumbai, Jakarta, and Manila, it is common to find gleaming buildings alongside massive shanty towns. This duality may even be seen in rich urban cities. In the outskirts of New York and San Francisco are poor urban enclaves occupied by African Americans and immigrant families who are often denied opportunities at a better life. Slowly, they are being forced to move further away from the economic centers of their cities. As the city attracts more capital and richer residents, real estate prices go up and poor residents are forced to relocate to far away but cheaper areas. This phenomenon of driving out the poor in favor of newer and wealthier residents is called gentrification. In Australian cities, poor Aboriginal Australians have been most acutely affected by this process. Once living in public urban housing, they were forced to move further away from city centers that offer more jobs, more government service, and better transportation due to gentrification. In France, poor Muslim migrants are forced out of Paris and have clustered around ethnic enclaves known as banlieues. In most of the world's global cities, the middle class is also thinning out. Globalization creates high-income jobs that are concentrated in global cities. These high earners, in turn, generate demand for an unskilled labor force that will attend to their increasing needs. Meanwhile, many middle-income jobs in manufacturing and business process outsourcing are moving to other countries. This hollowing out of the middle class in global cities has heightened the inequality within them. In places like New York, there are high-rolling American investment bankers whose children are raised by Filipina maids. A large global city may thus be a paradise for some, but a purgatory for others. Our conclusion to our study is that global cities are sites and mediums of globalization. They are therefore material representations of the phenomenon. Through them, we see the best of globalization. They are places that create exciting fusions of culture and ideas. They are also places that generate tremendous wealth. However, they remain sites of great inequality, where global servants serve global entrepreneurs. The question of how globalization can be made more just is partly a question of how people make their cities more just.
And that's the end of our discussion. Thank you for listening.